Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Lisa Beth Kovitz. In October 2019, Netflix premiered Raising Dion, a superhero drama based on the comic and short film by Dennis Liu.
Watch out! You! Dion, put that down!
We've invited author and UConn professor Betsy McCoach to join us in a discussion about gifted children. Betsy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
In the fiction, Dion's gifts break the laws of physics, but what is gifted in real life?
There's sort of two different ways that people look at giftedness. There's a whole school of people that really focus on the here and now. What do gifted kids need in schools right now, today? And then there are a lot of researchers who really focus on giftedness as the potential to achieve great things later in life. So how do we use children as a resource to sort of better society in the future? Personally, I don't really like that perspective because it seems like, just like with Dion, it puts a heavy weight on kids to sort of be expecting that bright students in school are going to be the kids who cure cancer and change the world for the better. So I really prefer to think about what do kids in school need today in order to sort of best meet their academic and social needs.
So is gifted the right word? Is superhero a better word for these kids?
Well, superhero seems like it's even more value-laden than gifted, but I don't think gifted is the right word. It really has such a value sort of, right? It's so value-laden, gifted. But I think that the field has kind of struggled with, well, you know, what else would you call these kids if you don't call them gifted? Academically able, bright sort of seems not very exciting. Gifted, though, I think is the most common term. Talented, people, you know, gifted, so you'll hear about gifted and talented programs. Some people make the distinction between gifted and talented, but often those words are used interchangeably.
That word gifted is so heavy. Gifted is almost overburdened word when
Absolutely.
applied to small kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also has this connotation that this child has gotten something that other kids didn't get. And so they've got this special thing, which I also think then creates some resentment potentially for those who maybe don't have gifted children or for kids who aren't gifted themselves. So I do feel like it is a very heavy word. And I do think that there can be negative effects of having that label attached to a kid.
The show is called Raising Dion, and it's a story told from the point of view of Dion's mother, who struggles because, guess what? It's not easy to raise a superhero. It's got to be pretty challenging to raise a gifted child, too.
Well, I think it's challenging to raise any kid. But I do think that there are special challenges when you're raising a gifted child. It's hard to know exactly what do you focus on. Do you focus on trying to really develop the talents that you see in the child? Do you focus on trying to give the kid the most normal childhood possible? Do you focus on the social and emotional? Do you focus on the academic? Those are all decisions that I think a parent has to make, and different parents, I think, make different decisions.
In the show, Dion's gifts are magical and obvious. In the real world, are gifted children obviously gifted?
Well, again, we don't know exactly how people are defining the term gifted, so we'll put that aside for a second and just assume that we're talking about sort of garden variety, academically gifted kids in schools. Even if we sort of narrow to that definition, it's still not obvious. There are a lot of reasons that giftedness might not be immediately identifiable to teachers or other school personnel. For example, I think teachers and school personnel are more likely to identify giftedness in kids who look a lot like they do, who come from similar backgrounds. So we know that students who come from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, kids who come from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, are less likely to be identified as gifted than other students are. And then also, giftedness can occur you know, in a whole range of students. So there are a whole There are many students who are twice exceptional, so gifted students who have learning disabilities, or gifted students who are on the autism spectrum, gifted students who have behavioral disorders. So any area of special education can coexist with giftedness, and I would say that those are often students who are overlooked because people see this exceptionality and they often overlook the gift.
So the big question then is, how do schools identify gifted children?
It really depends on the school and the school district and the state. So
there's no curriculum, this is a school by school, you. Oh.
yeah. So each state has different regulations about gifted education. So in some states, there's actually a mandate for gifted education, and some states are actually very particular about how you have to identify students and maybe even what services need to look like. Other states have absolutely no mandate at all. But even in states that have a pretty strict set of criteria for districts, it's always up to the district to decide how to identify students as gifted. And so when you go from one district to the next, what their idea of what a gifted student is might be very different from district to district. Jim Borland actually calls this geographic giftedness, because you could literally have somebody who lives in one school district be identified as gifted, move to another school district and not meet the criteria as gifted for that school district, which seems really weird to people. But again, it makes sense when it's the district that's deciding what it means to be gifted, and then ultimately also deciding what services they're going to provide for those students.
So the word is vague. The definition of the child's skills is vague.
The way we identify is vague, and then the service delivery is vague, sadly. So, and you would think, this is kind of sad, but you would think that there would be a really nice alignment between the way that a district identifies students as gifted and the services that they provide. But that's not always the case. Often districts decide how they're going to identify students as gifted, and they decide what kinds of services they're going to provide for gifted students, but they don't always think about the alignment between identification and service delivery, which is also really strange. Yeah. So you might have students being identified with a creativity test to do accelerated math, or students identified, with math tests to do creative problem solving, which makes absolutely no sense, because we know that not all kids are gifted in all areas. So somebody who's super creative may not be the same kid who's really great at math. And so this is a real problem.
When Dion and his future friend Jonathan get into a fight, the school principal, Mr. Campbell, immediately assumes it's Dion's fault and that Dion is not smart. In real-world, gifted programs are minority children and economically disadvantaged children underrepresented.
Absolutely. Can't say all, right, because they're district by district, but in most places we see that students of color and students who are economically disadvantaged are traditionally underserved in programs for the gifted. And in fact, we did a study where we controlled for third grade math and reading achievement. So we said, okay, well, maybe students from particular backgrounds are underrepresented in programs for the gifted because their achievement isn't as high, and that's why they're not being identified, which again is a problem, but it's a different problem.
It's a problem that took place in first grade.
Exactly. It's a problem that took place because there was some sort of an achievement gap that wasn't remedied early enough on. But we actually found in 2 of the 3 states that we looked at that even after you control for third grade reading and math achievement, that students of color and students who were eligible for free and reduced price lunch were still slightly less likely to be identified as gifted, which is really problematic and suggests that maybe there is some sort of a bias at play.
It does suggest that.
Yeah.
I think you're being very gentle in saying that it suggests that. It seems quite clear that there's a bias at play. So let's talk about how children are chosen. Prepping for the interview, I read some interesting essays about the idea that children are often identified as gifted because they have good memories and good manners versus the capacity, an advanced capacity for spatial relationships. And I didn't entirely understand what that was about.
I hope that's not true. I hope that they're not identified as gifted just because they have good memories and good manners. But I do think that visual spatial skills are related to some other general cognitive skills, but they're not necessarily completely redundant with quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning. And I would say that most of the assessments that are used to identify gifted students really focus on quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning. If they're using standardized cognitive type assessments, and again, there's really a wide variety of ways that students are identified, but using spatial type tests is used much less frequently. And there has been some research to suggest that students who are spatially gifted are not necessarily being identified as gifted.
And by spatially gifted, you're talking about the capacity to move geometric objects in space. That's what spatially gifted is. They're not just.
That's exactly right. That's
not
exactly
just good
right.
taking up space.
No, that's exactly right. They're able to sort of mentally rotate objects, and really sort of have really good spatial skills. And people who have really good spatial skills often end up in jobs like science, math, or architecture, the arts, right? I mean, there definitely are career paths where having strong visual spatial skills is really useful. Also career paths where it's less useful. But it is true that students who are visually spatially gifted, who maybe aren't as quantitatively or verbally gifted, are less likely to be identified as gifted. And actually, Lakin and Wei did a study recently that suggested that we might actually get more parity in terms of identification of students who are traditionally underserved if we used spatial giftedness as one of the criteria. So, I mean, it's really sort of early in that line of research to be able to say if that's definitively so, but it was, it's interesting research.
Do you think that's because spatial abilities are innate, whereas the other abilities have an element of learned at school?
I mean, I think that would be the rationale, although I think that there's probably some learning that takes place even with spatial abilities, right? I mean, I think with anything, we have these innate abilities, but the more that we develop those abilities, the more that we sort of nurture them, the better we will do. So for a long time, people thought, gee, if we just use nonverbal ability tests to identify students as gifted, that we would be able to solve this problem of finding certain groups being underserved as gifted. And I don't think that that will be the magic bullet. I don't think that it will get us all the way to parity, because nonverbal assessments, even though I do think they're probably a little bit less culture laden than verbal or quantitative assessments, they're still not culture free, and they're still not completely an assessment of potential without looking at sort of prior experiences.
All of our superheroes have godlike powers that change their bodies, except Tony Stark and Batman and Hawkeye and also Black Widow and Daredevil. Okay, most of our superheroes have superpowers that make them physically different than the rest of us. But what about gifted kids? Do gifted children have differently wired brains?
That's a really interesting question. So first, I think we don't definitively know the answer to that. There have been some studies that suggest that there are some differences in the brains of gifted students, but you have to remember that there's a huge amount of variability both within the gifted group and the non-gifted group. So, when they're seeing some slight differences, how much, usually these are very small sample sizes, how much sort of weight should we put in there? I'm not sure. The other thing I think that's really important to remember is that we actually can sort of change our own brains, right? We're constantly actually, when we learn new things, we're making those tracks in our brain, right? So there's this really important interplay between what you're born with and your environment. And it's this interaction between your environment and whatever you're innately born with that actually helps you to develop your abilities.
Gifted ed, is it special ed?
Well, in my opinion, gifted ed should be special ed. I do think of gifted students as having special needs, but again, gifted students are really variable, so they don't all have the same special needs. And so I think it's our job as educators to try to look at each student individually, figure out what those needs are, and then find a way that we can meet those needs. Again, in the context of K-12 education, which can never be completely individualized for any kid, really. But one of the things that we know actually for academically gifted kids is a really effective intervention that's very cost effective is academic acceleration. So if a student is really strong in math, rather than having them sit in the second grade math class and do all the things they already know, send them up to the third grade math class or the fourth grade math class or the fifth grade math class. And that's actually a really easy intervention because the teacher doesn't have to do anything different necessarily. They're sending the kid to a different class. Even so, for whatever reason, acceleration is not very popular in schools. Schools are really, I mean, again, I'm overgeneralizing. Some schools are great at accelerating kids, but often schools or districts are really loath to academically accelerate kids. And I think there's this belief, which is not borne out by the research literature, that kids who are academically accelerated are going to suffer later on in life, that they're going to end up being oddballs.
Do we culturally have a somewhat warped and not very kind view of very smart children, that they're awkward or that they're strange?
I think that's true, and I think that that goes back a long way. Actually, back in the 19th century, there was this criminologist, actually, Cesare Lombroso. He believed that there was this link between genius and insanity. And he actually said there are only 6 geniuses. He looked through all the geniuses of the world and said there were only 6 geniuses that had ever lived that weren't basically nuts. I can't remember all of them offhand, but he thought Shakespeare was nuts. And who did he not think was nuts? I can't remember off the top of my head.
I can say who was Tesla. And
oh yeah. There were many, but he had a very short list of people who were genius, who were not insane. And so I think actually starting back in the 19th century, that whole idea sort of permeated our culture. That like if you're gifted, then maybe you're paying for it in some other way, right? So you've got this gift, but then you've also got this, social oddity, or there's some sort of handicap that you're sort of paying the piper for your gifts, if you will. But again, the research does not bear that out.
But sometimes what we think of as a quirk or an oddity, for example, Alan Turing, he was gay. And that was just not socially acceptable. And until that was, he must have seen.
I think everybody's a little odd, right? I mean, if you think about it, when you get to know people, once you get to know people, just about everybody is odd in some way or another. But I think what ends up happening is when somebody who's really, really bright also has a quirk, people just in their minds connect it and say, oh, that person's really, really bright. And they're kind of quirky. They must be quirky because they're bright. But there are a lot of people who are quirky, who aren't superheroes, right?
Everybody's nuts.
That's right. Everybody's nuts. Some people are better at hiding it than others.
Some people think that a gifted kid is just fine and won't need this extra help at school. What do you think?
So again, there's a ton of variability across kids. It's really hard to generalize. But I would say, yeah, some kids will be fine on their own, but some kids won't. Right? And so that's the tricky thing, is figuring out, you can't figure out actually who's necessarily going to be fine on their own. So I think it's best to really try to meet their academic needs. Kids who are really bright, who don't have academic challenges, I think the most common things that happen are that they don't actually learn to work hard because everything is so easy in school. And the reality is that at some point, you do end up having to work, and that can be a real shocker. So for a really bright kid who goes through all the way through high school and never has to work hard, often those are the kids who go to college and they haven't learned how to study, and now suddenly they have to be sort of responsible for their own work and their own study habits, and they may, again, this is not all gifted kids, right? But they may fall apart at that point. I teach PhD students, and so I work with a lot of bright people, and often the PhD program is the first time that people have really had to work hard. So I think that is a huge downside to not making sure that kids are actually challenged when they're young, because you don't develop the metacognitive and self-regulatory skills that you need to be successful later on. Again, that isn't to say that all bright kids who aren't challenged are going to grow up to be underachievers, but we do know that there are a non-negligible number of gifted kids who do end up being underachievers or who do end up sort of struggling with those issues later in life. So I think, making sure that they learn how to learn early on is a good thing.
I think the classic example also is the gifted troublemaker.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So gifted kids who aren't being challenged in school, some of them will act out and they'll become behavioral issues. Some of them will just turn off school and they will become underachievers. Some of them will do just fine, be bored in school, play the school game, K through 12, go to college, and turn out just fine. Interestingly, it does seem like there are some gender differences in this regard that this might not be surprising, but girls tend to be better at playing along with the school game than boys. Boys are more likely to end up as underachievers.
Yep. Cross the board, gifted or not.
Yeah, cross the board, gifted or not. I think that's right.
In Raising Dion, it's hard to tell if the mega corporation Bayona is good or evil, but they are definitely rich and pouring tons of money into developing the abilities of these superpowered kids. In real life, are gifted programs expensive?
In real life, gifted programs are some of the most unfunded programs around. Again, varies from district to district, but I think I actually read at the federal level, for every $500,000 that are spent on education, only $1 goes to gifted education. So every $500,000 in education, $1 is allocated to gifted ed at the federal level, which is kind of an astounding statistic. Now, of course, there is no federal mandate for gifted education, so it kind of makes sense from that perspective, but that helps you to realize that means that all of the onus for funding gifted programs sits at either the state or the local level. And many states don't provide any funding for gifted ed. So that means that it's the district that has to fund the gifted ed program on their own. And so again, in states where there isn't a strong mandate, often gifted ed programs sort of suffer the same fate as any other sort of what are considered optional or extra programs. They end up getting sort of cut just like second language in elementary school or music or art programs do. So I would say that you could make an expensive gifted program, and there are some that exist, but by and large, gifted ed is really severely underfunded.
The kid is something else.
In Raising Dion, the mother is a struggle. It's a lot of work. Do you have any recommendations for the parents of superheroes?
So I would start by giving recommendations for parents who have really, really young kids who appear to be very gifted. I often hear from parents who have 1 or 2 or 3-year-olds who are doing amazing things already. They're doing math or they're reading at a very young age, and the parents often say, "Well, what should I do? What should I do?" And I always say, just take the lead from the child. Do what you're doing anyway. I mean, before the kid goes to school, you can really, right? You don't have to push, but if the child is taking the lead and really wants to learn these things, providing a really great and enriching environment is the best thing that you can do for the child. But you don't have to worry about a kid getting, behind at age 2, right? And the reality is that I think the tough part, sadly, comes when the child enters school. So sort of prior to kindergarten, provide an enriching environment, teach the kid things, and just have fun with it. Then when you hit kindergarten and the child already knows everything that's in the curriculum, that's when I think that sometimes the difficulties start, and the parent is put in sometimes an awkward situation where they have to sort of really advocate for their child and make sure that their child's needs are being met in the classroom, which can be difficult.
But that should be for the parents of superheroes and the parents of everyday child. You should be in there making sure your kid is getting. Every child needs an advocate, and a parent is a great advocate.
That is true, but I think that's another place, I think, where we see differences across cultures in terms of the way that parents might be comfortable interacting with schools. So in certain cultures, to sort of go in and really push hard for your child would seem very like you're not respecting the teacher and the teacher's authority. And so it is interesting. I feel like, I think that that parents of privilege are a lot more likely to go in and advocate for their children. And I think this is probably another reason when we talked about identification and finding that there are differences in terms of who's being identified, that there are these sort of, cultural and socioeconomic differences. I suspect that some of it actually comes from maybe not as, I said, it could be school bias, but it also could be coming from the parental side that, parents of privilege are much more likely to get into the school and say, hey, my kid needs something different. You need to do something different for my kid. And other parents might be more trusting that the school is going to do the right thing for their child and say, look, the school hasn't contacted me to say that my child needs something different. So the school would know best and I'm going to trust the school. And sadly, maybe we can't always trust the school to be challenging the brightest kids in the class.
Bessie, I'm so sorry. We are out of time. I could talk about this for a long time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. This was really fun.